Well, Africa's young, tech-savvy population is increasingly using mobile phones to bridge gaps in services, including banking. I spoke to the Group CEO of Africa's biggest wireless company, MTN, about plans to spin off their financial technology operations, future opportunities, AI, and so much more. But I started by asking Ralph Mupita about the impact U.S.-China competition on the continent is having on their business.
We're very mindful of these geopolitical forces, but we're trying to be neutral. The two big elephants, kind of on a safari, and we just don't want to get in the way. And I think, that's pretty much what most businesses in Africa are trying to do. We've been developing. We invest about $2 billion per annum in capital expenditure, upgrading our networks and covering more people, building capacity in our networks. As we move through the technology cycles, 3G to 4G to 5G, we've actually been able to buy more with that $2 billion envelope as prices are coming down for radios, we invest in the core, etc. So I wouldn't say we've benefited from it in particular. I think we've just been smart around how we procure, because the average customer that we serve, we're making, average revenue per user $2 to $3. In some markets, maybe as high as $5, but not too many markets. So we have to make do. We have to make our investment go a very long way. And the way we procure technology then becomes, super, super critical.
How far out do you see artificial intelligence then benefiting a lot of your customers and the people on the continent here? Because in a lot of other parts of the world, many people are pouring money into AI right now. Do you see this a little bit further out, though, the advent of AI for the continent being a little bit further out?
Yeah, I went to a Microsoft conference in Seattle about 2 years ago, and the topic for 2 days was AI, and the conversations was how much investments, how these large language models were being developed, what data sets were they ingesting, and so forth. And I left there after 2 days. I said, "Wow, man, there's no Africa in this conversation, none whatsoever." But fast forward 2 years later. I think, quite a lot of development has happened. A lot more African languages are, going into these models. And I guess if you hark back to, let's say, the smartphone era, and the smartphone era, we saw that initially the smartphones weren't available for Africans, but there was a rapid catch-up in development.
Ralph, when we think about sort of what you have to oversee, you were recently with all of the CEOs from MTN from across the continent. How many are there? 7?
Yeah, 17 markets.
17, okay.
Yeah, 17.
But, I say that to say they're very different markets, right? How do you navigate the challenges of markets that have currency volatility versus, war-torn countries? I mean, what is sort of your thinking in overseeing these different markets?
We're able to leapfrog challenges that people generally have, telecommunications being one, and kind of bringing people to the internet. The other is financial inclusion. Banks and insurers have done great work, but a lot of Africans are still left out of decent financial services, and we've stepped into that breach to drive inclusion. I think the thing that when you look at Africa, and we often look at the structural trends. So if we believe in the structural trends, we'll sustain the investment. We had some difficulties, let's say in a market like Nigeria last year, with the significant currency devaluation. But underneath all of that, we said, well, hang on, there's demand for data is significant. We have to sustain the investment and so forth. So, finally, we're an African company. We've nowhere else to go. We have to figure out, the solutions to some of the challenges. But, we're passionate about the continent's development.
But you have made some exits in other parts of the world that weren't necessarily serving that mantra, right?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, we also have to look at, we have finite resources. We have finite capital. We have finite, bandwidth as a management and a board. And so we've exited some small markets like Guinea-Bissau and Guinea-Conakry. And we're always on the lookout, are there markets that we need to go into? We haven't entered any, but we always apply our minds. Are there markets where we can make a difference, we can make a return, and so forth? But, We have 290 million subscribers, more or less, who are using an MTN SIM every day. Yeah, so we've got a lot of customers to look after and deliver services to them.
Have you thought about potential partners for the fintech business?
Yeah, we've already made some progress there. We're talking to MasterCard. They're going to take up a stake that will probably be about 4%. And the board has appetite that we have minority investments up to 30%. We're not putting ourselves under pressure to do this quickly. So we'll do this as and when it makes sense and ensure that we have the right shareholding structure. And more importantly, the right kind of capabilities, the right technology and platforms to make sure that this business remains relevant the next 5 to 10 years.
Potentially private equity? Would you look to private equity investors?
We would look at the right financial investor who could support us to accelerate the growth of business faster, not just that they write a check. So, yeah, as I mentioned, we're happy to go up to 30% there within the fintech business.
Could we see some of that development in 2025, or you're saying you want to take your time with this?
You might see it, you might not see it, so we would move as quickly as we see. We're always talking to people. And so, if something makes sense, we will consummate a relationship or a transaction. But we're not putting pressure on ourselves to say, you must do X by Y. I have shareholders, some will say, you're moving a little bit too fast. Why don't you slow down? Some say move faster. So there isn't like a pressing push to bring shareholders into the fintech platform like ASAP. We'll do it on an organic basis at a pace that we feel is natural as the business is evolving.